You've got a president captured in Venezuela, and then you have this massive military escalation with Iran. On the surface, they look like two totally separate crises, right? But what if they're not? What if they're actually two fronts in the exact same war? Today, we're going to unpack a huge story of energy, finance, and a high-stakes competition that connects both of these flashpoints straight back to Beijing.
So, the big question is, how on earth are these dramatic events in Caracas connected to the tensions just boiling over in Tehran? I mean, they're 5,000 miles apart. It's a question that really gets to the heart of how power works in the world today.
Well, the key to unlocking this whole thing comes from a pretty unexpected place. We're talking about a strategic paper from what is arguably Beijing's most important think tank, the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, or CICIR for short. And look, this isn't just some dusty academic theory. This is the actual framework China's leaders are using to understand and, more importantly, to respond to American strategy.
All right, so let's get into it. How exactly do these Chinese strategists view the U.S. playbook? Well, according to this CICIR paper, it all boils down to four main characteristics. First up, you have strong interference. That's the constant political and diplomatic pressure to get everyone to align with U.S. positions. Then there's strong predation. This is the economic angle, using sanctions and trade to control resources and basically lock out competitors. Third, strong offensiveness, which is pretty straightforward, a readiness to use direct military force. And last, but definitely not least, strong exclusivity. And this is the idea that certain regions are just America's backyard, period.
Okay, so that last one, strong exclusivity, is really interesting. It's actually led analysts to coin a new term, the Monroe Doctrine. Think of it as a 21st century update to the old Monroe Doctrine. It takes that classic idea of the Western Hemisphere as a U.S. sphere of influence and mixes it with a very modern, very transactional approach that's aimed squarely at one thing, kicking out non-hemispheric competitors. And guess who's at the top of that list? China.
All right, so now let's see this playbook in action. We'll start with Venezuela, because this wasn't just some random event. According to the analysis, this was a meticulously planned, step-by-step operation. It started with economic isolation and CIA infiltration. Then, the military pressure was dialed way up, leading to a full-on tanker blockade that literally choked off the country's oil lifeline. And the endgame? It was incredibly fast. On January 3, 2026, President Maduro was captured. The whole raid took just a little over 2 hours. But here's where it gets really interesting. The goal? It wasn't about bringing democracy. Not at all. Instead, the U.S. basically kept the government structure in place, but took direct control of the oil sector. And this quote from the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, pretty much says it all. The real objective was to control the energy flow and, crucially, to disrupt the supply chains that were vital to China. I mean, China was buying up 80% of Venezuela's oil.
So, you see the playbook in Venezuela. Now, Washington is trying to apply a similar template to Iran. But here's the thing. Iran isn't just another key energy supplier for Beijing. It's a much, much tougher opponent. We're talking about risks on an exponentially higher scale.
And this slide really shows you why. I mean, compare the two. Venezuela's military capability is lower. Iran, they have a huge stockpile of missiles. Geographically, Venezuela's capital is just 10 miles from the coast. Tehran is 400 miles inland. And then there's the proxy network. Venezuela's is limited. Iran commands this vast network of allies they call the axis of resistance, which can strike back all across the Middle East. It is, simply put, a way, way harder target.
And for China, the stakes are just enormous. That number you see, $400 billion, that's the potential value of the massive 25-year cooperation deal Beijing signed with Tehran. We're talking a colossal investment in infrastructure and energy. It's about 40 times bigger than China's outstanding debt in Venezuela. For Beijing, losing this isn't just a financial hit, it's a systemic threat to their entire strategy. So, this brings us to a really crucial point, one that the CSIR paper hammers home. All these military and economic moves we're seeing, they're just tactics. They're tactics in a much larger, much more fundamental conflict, a war for the future of the entire global financial system. Okay, so for decades, right, the US dollar has been king. It's been the bedrock of global power. But that's starting to change. Just look at this data from SWIFT. As of December 2025, the Chinese yuan has climbed to become the second most used currency in global trade finance. And let's be clear,
This isn't just about countries diversifying their portfolios. This is a direct challenge to the dollar's long-held monopoly.
And this chart right here, it makes Beijing's dilemma absolutely crystal clear. Look at Venezuela. The debt exposure, about $15 billion, was manageable. Plus, China's ability to project power over there was pretty limited. But Iran is a different story. That $400 billion investment is tied directly to their project of making the yuan an international currency. So from Beijing's perspective, an attack on Iran isn't just an attack on a partner. It's a direct attack on the very infrastructure of their alternative financial system.
Now, this global financial war, it's not just a two-player game between Washington and Beijing. It's putting everyone else, especially traditional U.S. allies in Europe, in an impossible spot. They're caught between their political ideals and their cold, hard economic realities.
And this number right here is the reason why. $3.6 trillion. That's how much U.S. Treasury debt European countries are holding. And you have to understand, that's not just an investment. That's a deep structural dependency on the U.S. financial system, and it severely ties their hands, limiting what they can and can't do.
And this whole situation in Spain just perfectly captures this paradox. On one hand, you have the Spanish Prime Minister, Sanchez, defiantly saying no to war, flat out refusing to let the U.S. use its military bases for any strikes on Iran. That's political defiance. But at the exact same time, Spain's biggest energy company, Repsol, is expanding its business in Venezuela. And how? Under a strict license from the U.S. that has one big condition: China is excluded. So what does that tell you? Political disagreement might be tolerated, but financial disobedience? That's a different story.
Okay, so we've looked at all this through the lens of Beijing's top strategists. What's the big takeaway here? What should you remember from all this?
Here's the bottom line. What's happening in Venezuela and Iran, these aren't just separate regional conflicts. You have to see them as battlefields in a much larger war. A war over two things: control of energy and control of the global financial system. It's a structural clash between the U.S. trying to protect its dollar-based system and China trying to build a new one around the yuan.
And that leaves us with one final and really critical question to think about. As the global financial system starts to fragment, to break apart, is that Spanish paradox we saw going to become the new normal for everyone? The real question is, in a world where your economic loyalties and your political loyalties are being pulled in completely different directions, how long can any nation actually avoid choosing a side?